Okay. I'm grateful to our musicians, our platform people, our daily word reader, and to all of you. I'm glad you're here this morning. Okay. Claiming all that your eye can see. You know, when I thought about this, I thought, yeah, prosperity talk. But, you know, this is going to be a prosperity talk, but kind of a little bit different, I think. You know, when we think of prosperity, we often think of money, of riches, of goods, that kind of thing here. But we know in Unity that prosperity is every good, every form of good, every opportunity, every blessing. The title here, Claiming All the Good Your Eye Can See. When I was developing this talk, I came across this blurb, which basically said how unmindful American novelists can be when they talk about the capabilities of the human eye. For example, the article said, they don't give a hang about what they do with their characters' eyes in their novels. For instance, they write things like, her eyes roamed carelessly around the room. Or with her eyes, she riveted him to the spot. Or this one, he tore his eyes from her face and they fell on the letter on the floor. And this one I love. Their eyes met for a long, breathless moment and then they swam together. That is so fun. Jesus, our master teacher, he actually shared quite a bit more about the capabilities of our eyes, EYE. In Matthew, he shares the 6th chapter of Matthew, verses 21 through 22. Jesus says, the light of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is single, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is evil, your whole body will be full of darkness. Now, I found myself wondering exactly what did Jesus mean by this? If your eye is full of light, your whole body is filled with light. If your eye is filled with evil, your whole body is full of darkness. And I think what he was talking about was something beyond the physical eyes here. I think he was talking about the I am, the identity that we have. When our mind is focused on negativity, we might say the I is being evil, anger, resentment, unforgiveness. When we are focused on these kinds of things, we can draw those kinds of experiences to us. But if we focus on the things that we consider light, love, joy, kindness, then our experience becomes what we focus on. There are ways of seeing in our world which have nothing to do with our physical eyes, and a lot more to do with our I identity. Light is a symbol for understanding, for wisdom. You know, in the beginning we have God saying, let there be light, the creation of the world. In the creation of any experience in our life, we can affirm, let there be light. Let me experience understanding and wisdom in this endeavor. To have the eye single means that we are able to, well, let me put it this way. When you look out with your physical eyes, you see all kinds of things. There are all kinds of people, all kinds of colors, all kinds of things going on. A multiplicity of experiences out there. But when the eye is single, you are choosing to focus your inner sight in a particular way. And I believe that spiritually, when the eye is single, that means that we are able to see beyond the chaos, beyond the lack, beyond the appearance of limitation. When we are able, for example, to look past the hurtful actions of others, others who may have hurt us, and we're able to forgive, we are looking with the eye of love. When we are able to look at our bank statement and realize that we're kind of short on cash without panicking, without being depressed, and we can declare that the rich substance of God is flowing into my life right now, we are choosing to look with the eyes of faith. We are able to look with different kinds of eyes. This seeing that is seeing with our inmost self, as Jesus saw, allows us to be open to the blessings that life has for us. Likewise, Jesus says, when the eye is evil, then when we are focusing on the negative or the lack or the limitation, we can see stars or we can see mud. There's a story about two inmates who were sharing a prison cell, and there was only one window in their prison room. One prisoner looked out, and he reported that all he could see was mud. And the second prisoner, when he looked out, he reported that he saw stars. And a passerby was stopped and asked to interpret this. And the person said, "Oh, that's simple. Well, the guy that looked out and saw mud, he was looking down. And the guy that looked out the window and he saw stars, well, he got bumped on the head when he was looking out." It came as a surprise to me because, you expect that person to say the second person was looking up, okay? But it's just a different kind of perspective on things. Haven't you ever been bumped on the head from life experiences or life circumstances? I know that I have, and sometimes I've needed that bump on the head to wake me up, to make me be aware of my interactions in life. There is a law at work here, which we call in Unity the law of cause and effect. And it's sometimes called the law of giving and receiving. But the law of mind and action, as we know it, basically states that whatever we are choosing to focus our thoughts on, those thoughts that we are holding on to in consciousness, they're going to take shape and form in our experience in some way. This being a spiritual law, it always works, okay? But we can use this to work it, to experience greater good in our lives as well. There are times in our lives when we just feel like running away from our problems. It seems like so much effort to work through them, to see our way through them, that we just want to run away from them. It's kind of like this woman named Edith. She's the mother of 8 children. And one afternoon, she had been out visiting with her neighbor just right next door, and she was coming back home. And as she entered her front door, she saw all of her kids. She had 8 kids, but the 5 youngest ones were kind of sitting in a circle there on the living room floor. And whatever it was that they were focusing on, they were very, very involved. So she kind of slipped quietly up to the side so that she could see what they were all focusing on in there. And she couldn't believe her eyes because there were baby skunks right there on her living room floor that her kids were enamored by. And she didn't think, she just thought, "Children, kids, run!" And so the kids jumped up. They each grabbed a skunk and they ran. I guess she needed more specific instructions, like run but leave the skunks. Anyway, the moral is, if skunks you think, skunks you get. We can't run away from who we are. Wherever we go, wherever we are. But also, wherever we are, those things that we tried to run away from, they're there too. You are never alone. But we are able to see and experience in life. What we are able to see and experience in life largely depends on what we're looking at, how we're looking at it, and what we're looking with. That's the focal point of my talk today, what we're looking with. Our our I or spiritual identity, we express that in terms as the Christ within us, that individual, personalized expression of God that indwells each of us. In his book called As Far as the Eye Can See, Stories to Illumine the Soul, Mark Depot shares something about how we look and how we see things. He writes, we often look, but we don't always see. That is, until something happens, something we experience in the world causes us to suddenly see. Prior to this, we were just looking, and we may have thought we were seeing. What happens, he says, is when we suddenly see, the basic habit of our understanding is altered. It's shattered. It's opened up. It's flipped over. And he says this is what we call a paradigm shift. It's one of those, oh, wow, okay, now I see, okay? And it's a whole other turnaround in our consciousness. It reminded me of Tim's talk a couple of weeks ago when he said, the title, I'm out of my head and you can be too, okay? This idea that we often, when we see things or perceive things, we often think that that's the truth. That's the reality of things, okay? We forget that tomorrow or another person looking at that and experiencing that same thing can have something totally different. Many of us, I think, are pretty content looking at our world with our eyes, our physical eyes. And we're pretty comfortable at accepting our perceptions as being the real deal until something happens to shake us up. And we don't take the time to even question what we think we see or understand. We take our understanding of the situation and our perception for granted. But this can cause us some problems as we interact with others and communicate with them. And this problem is illustrated by Kevin's experience. Kevin had shingles. Kevin walked into the doctor's office and the receptionist asked Kevin, well, what do you have? And Kevin said shingles. So she wrote down his name, she wrote down his address, and took his medical insurance card and got information. And she told him to have a seat. 15 minutes later, a nurse's aide comes in and she asked Kevin what he had. And Kevin said shingles. And so she wrote down his height, she took his weight, she took a complete medical history, and she had Kevin go and wait in a different room, in the examining room. About a half hour later than this, a nurse comes and asks Kevin what he had. Kevin said shingles. So the nurse gave him a blood test, gave him a blood pressure test, did an electrocardiogram test on him, and had him take off his clothes and put on the hospital gown and wait for the doctor. An hour later, finally, the doctor comes in to see Kevin, and he finds Kevin sitting patiently in his hospital gown, and he asked Kevin what he had. Kevin said shingles. The doctor asked, where? Kevin said, outside in the truck. Where do you want me to unload them? It's good. They all thought they understood what Kevin meant when he said, I have shingles. Not until that point did someone ask, where? Brian Anderson, a young man who served our country as a Iraqi war veteran, did 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And just this Friday, a friend of mine, we were visiting and talking, and I was sharing this talk title, and granted, I'd had 2 weeks to come up and work on this talk, but something always happens, okay? I kind of wait until Friday, Saturday, crunch time, whatever. But, I became aware that sometimes it is so good for me to wait because things change, okay? I could have had this talk done like 2 weeks ago or something, but then I would have missed the opportunity to share this special story with you this morning. And I was visiting with a friend, and she shared with me that her mother had gotten a copy of Guidepost magazine. It's a subscription that she gets. And on the front cover of Guidepost was a young man called Brian Anderson. And he's written a book called No Turning Back. And Brian was on the cover of Guidepost because he chose a different way of looking at a situation in his life. And that different way of looking changed his whole life. Brian became the 4th triple amputee from the Iraqi war. And he had a difficult time with it. He's online, and you can look at the story and hear him tell about what happened. And when people approach him, they always want to know, well, what happened? How did it happen? How did you lose both of your legs and your left hand? And Brian is quick to say, basically, that, I'll share the story with you, but I'm so much more than that experience. He was a sergeant in the Army, and he was the driver of a Humvee. And he and 2 other crewmates were driving down this road, and one of those IEDs on the road exploded, okay? And this one, it was a different kind. He said usually they get triggered and they explode and blow up everything. But this particular one that the Iraqis had used was a directional kind of a system. And it would go forward in a straight line without destroying everything else, but it would destroy everything in its path. And the metal that encased this particular bomb got so hot that it would melt through things. So when this thing went off, now Brian was in the driver's seat, he was driving the Humvee, and when this thing went off, it went right through the metal, the armored Humvee metal, and it went through and it took off both of his legs, and because his left hand was down, it took that off too. And he didn't even know that this had happened to him. One of the reasons he survived this is because the heat of this bomb was so intense that it cauterized the wounds, and he didn't bleed to death. But he tells the story that immediately after this happened, there was smoke everywhere. He couldn't see anything, okay? And he called for his buddies. He got no answer. He began to get fearful for them. And he didn't realize that something had happened to him until he said that there was blood on his face. And the flies were horrible out there. So they began buzzing around him, and he lifted up his left hand to brush them away, and then suddenly became aware that his hand was missing. Whew, it's quite a story, okay? But what is so inspiring about this young man is that he chose to see this experience in a different way. People would come up later and say, wow, aren't you grateful that God saved you? And he would say, he kind of turned that around because they were saying, God saved your life. And in his mind, they were saying, God saved your life in the way that it is now. And what he wanted to say was that God made my life so much better than it was before. He was the kind of guy who grew up, he was athletic, and all of his life he wanted to do great things. He wanted to serve, he wanted to help. And that is one of the reasons that he pushed himself to excel in whatever he did. And he shared with people, hey, I'm the same me. I still have the same goals. I'm still inspired by the same things. After this happened to him, he went into a coma. When he woke up, he was in Washington, D.C., in the Walter Reed Hospital there. And his mother was there, and she was leaning over him, greeting him when he woke up out of a coma. And she said to him, you've been in a bad accident, and you've been in a coma for 7 days. And she said, son, you have 2 options facing you. And he said, yeah, I know. I can choose to die, or I can choose to move on with my life. And he said, at that moment, I chose to move on with my life. His mother told him, you can do a lot of things, because he wondered, well, what can I do now? What is my life going to be like now? I have just one hand. His mother told him, you can do a lot of things. You're going to get better and move on. And someday soon, you're going to do great things. And he said, because my mom kept saying it over and over and over, I began to believe it. And other people began to believe it about me too. Other people, when they approached me, they began to see me as more than a wounded vet. And as I began to see who I really was, I'm not my body. I'm this spirit, this essence, okay, that can move beyond the physical condition of my body. He said it was like a snowball rolling down a mountain, getting bigger and bigger every second until it got so big that you couldn't stop it. And it became true. On the benefit, actually, what I found so inspiring, not only that story, but throughout this book, he talks about, and he says, don't think of this as a book on war. It's not a political thing here, okay? It's not even about the tragedy, or calling it a tragedy, that happened to me. It's about life. It's about how I'm choosing to go on with my life. And so he has a lot of wisdom that he shares with people, and I wanted to share some of these items with you. This is Brian Anderson speaking. And I put it on cards so that I wasn't going to be leafing back and forth in the book. But on the benefit of surrounding yourself with positive people when you are moving through challenges, meaning when we are trying to see differently an experience that challenges us, a problem, a difficulty, there is a benefit in surrounding ourselves with positive people, with people who can say, hey, you're going to get through this. You can do things. He wrote, if someone tells you the same thing over and over again, after a while, you're going to start to believe it. If you surround yourself with positive people who say you're going to be all right, it can build you up. It can carry you forward. It can keep you going. But if you let yourself listen to the people who fill your head with how awful a thing is, how tragic a thing is, it won't be long before you start thinking the way that they do. So surround yourself with the people who will share those uplifting ideas. He said the same thing applies to how we speak about ourselves. If we call ourselves stupid or ugly or a klutz, he writes, pretty soon you will start believing your own bad press, your own bad news. You owe yourself better than that. He writes, well, don't put yourself down, because there are more than enough jerks out there who are happy to put you down. So don't you do it. About the need to accept our circumstances before we can change them, Brian wrote, the hardest part of his rehab was accepting what had happened to him. And not in a negative way, but just like saying, okay, this has happened. Now, where am I going to go from here? Not dwelling on it again, and not a pity kind of thing here, but okay, this is happening. Now, let me focus on where I go from here. Let me place my eyes on the next step. During his stay at Walter Reed, Brian said that you could tell those people that were making steady progress in their rehabilitation from the ones who were having a hard time. He said those that were having a hard time, they were not accepting what had happened. They were angry and they hated life. In contrast to that, those, he said, that accepted their circumstance were then able to move beyond it. So part of this, what he's saying is, part of the way that we can claim our good when we see negativity and lack and limitation is we can accept where we are and move from that. He wrote, bad things happen to us. It's a fact of life. No one's immune. For me, he said, it was getting blown up. For someone else, it might be losing a job or losing a loved one who's dying or your house burning down. There are things, he said, we can't avoid, at least not forever. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. We can choose to lie down and die or go on living. And I'm not saying, he said, that we should brush off everything that life throws at us, because there's nothing wrong with grieving for family or friends or people that we've lost or experiences that we've had to let go of, or taking time to adjust to changing events in our lives. But it's not healthy, he said, to mourn forever. Brian wrote in his book, life is meant to be lived forward, and you can't do that if you spend all of your time looking backward. You can carry some of that old stuff with you, but don't let it slow you down. At some point, you just have to get back on your feet and go. Walk if you have to. Run if you can. On falling and getting up, Brian explains that he had fallen down 1,000 times while learning how to use his two new legs and his hand. It's attached with a brace on his arm. And he said, actually, falling is just another part of the journey. And he learned that in falling, it taught him how to get up. Our falling can teach us how to get up. Everyone has limitations, he writes in the book, and some people have more than others, okay? And we have to look at what we can do with what we've got. We have to use the tools that we find in us and around us to do the things that we think we can't. He said it's not hard to fall into the trap of thinking there's only one way to do something. When life makes our own methods and the things that we've done in the past difficult, well, this is not an excuse, he says, to give up. He says it's our job to be responsible, to find another way, find another tool. This young man, he water skis, he does rock climbing, he learned how to ride a quad. Do you guys know what that is? Okay, it's one of those, it's kind of like one of those over-the-road kind of recreational things that people ride around in and zoom through the dust and whatever, okay? It's a quad, he calls it, I guess. And he learned how to ride this thing, okay? With a little help from mechanics who kind of adjusted steering wheels and those kinds of things. And this is a guy who loved speed all of his life, okay? And he said, when you ask them who I am, they'll tell you, he's a guy who loves speed. Everything is speed to him. It's thrilling. And he said, I'm no different now. I get in this motorized wheelchair and I'm speed, okay? I ride in my quad, I'm speed, okay? He swims. Oh my goodness, this guy is all over the place. And he said, I still think of myself as an athlete, he said. And the things that I learned, when you're an athlete and you fall down, okay, you fall off the beam or whatever it is you're doing, you learn to get back up, brush yourself off, and you keep going. Well, that's what I do here, okay? And in a strange way, he says, that God has blessed him. Not to say that his experience, okay, and losing his limbs is a particularly good thing. It became a blessing in his life because he said, today, I can be an inspiration to so many people. And he goes and he visits other vets and other handicapped people and children. And he said he was on the cover of Esquire magazine, okay? And he did a movie. Someone contacted him. They saw him on the cover of Esquire, and they contacted him to do a movie. And they made him, well, actually, there were 2 times. One time he played a victim, okay? Another time he was the murderer, okay? And something happens to this guy in the movie. But I just can't imagine. He said, I found out I'm a natural-born actor, okay? He said, I love my life, okay? Someone else who would see this differently, they'd have a hard time. But I love my life. And he said, and the reason is because I chose to see it differently. I choose to see it with my eye. I thought Brian Anderson was really, really inspirational. And I'm blessed to be able to share this story with you. Look him up, okay? It's good stuff, okay? I can't share everything in here because this guy, on the back cover, he's doing rock climbing. Unbelievable, okay? Wow. I can't rock climb, and I've got all my limbs right now. But God is good, okay? And that presence and power indwells each of us and enables us to see things with our eye and claim the good that our physical eyes doesn't see is there. Thank you. God bless.